Ginger Prime has made the video that I asked him to make.
Anyway,
Okay.
let's dive in.
Let's dive in, yes.
I think it's incredibly important to preface every bit of feedback that I give in an MMO to what I feel an MMO is. And that comes from Final Fantasy XI.
So, I didn't play FF11. And there's only one thing that I know about FF11. What I know about FF11 is that it had a boss that caused vomiting and took 18 hours to beat. Yeah, I know that FF11 had a boss in which people were passing out and getting physically ill. We decided to end it before we risked turning into a horrible news story about how video games ruin people's lives. He also mentioned several members of the Link Shell vomited over the course of the battle. So when people say that FF11 was hardcore, believe them. Okay, like I have like so much different respect now for FF11 players. I feel like they're on a level that I would never ever reach.
If it is something that anything he says here or anything she says here makes you say something about that interests me, or I'd love to have a little context and try that myself, that is available.
The thing a lot of people end up missing is what was going on during the time, especially in Japanese game development, and there was a lot of fears about people dying and losing their lives in these online games. And so Final Fantasy XIV kind of...
It looks kind of like the Arbiter.
Development cycle grew up among these restrictions and fears that were being, capitalized by news media at the time. So it's really interesting to see how that played out, because I wish Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 kept a lot of what I'm going to share with you, and maybe one day it will. But
so what kind of worries and fears influenced the development of 1.0 coming off the heels of FF11? Like,
the No Clip documentary is likely the aside that if you just want to take a pause from this video and go dive into a 3-part documentary from No Clip, that's likely the answer to this question.
Because from what I understand, 1.0 was also pretty hardcore.
A player-driven economy. A player-driven economy is essential to what makes an MMORPG an MMORPG. That is my definition. That's something that I always look for. Why is that? What does that do for us as players? It removes some of this mindless restriction between, or friction between, the casual and the hardcore player.
So how is the player economy in New World different from the Final Fantasy XIV? Like, obviously having a player-driven economy is fantastic, and it's needed in the MMO, but doesn't FF14 have that?
No.
He said that, like,
no.
Maybe
Final Fantasy XIV has one of the worst but still functional market board designs in MMORPGs for games that are made in 2022. It was designed based on some ideas and some plans and some thoughts on how things were built back when it was built. There is a reason World of Warcraft has changed so much. They did not change it until it was literally crippling their servers. They waited as late as possible, which is why the rollout felt so rushed, and the initial rollout was such a poor experience, but they had to get to the other side. It was literally holding their servers back. No, like, simply put, Final Fantasy, due to simplicity in the gearing system, due to limitations in the glamour system, due to limitations in the housing system, due to ease of access to everybody being a gatherer crafter, being able to make everything, due to the simplicity in macroing there are a lot of reasons that there's not a whole lot of reasons that things are hitting the market board that we consume on an everyday basis. Outside of things like raid consumables, which is what he's talking about, that kind of top end people consuming 600 potions, and then where do those come from? Especially when we all spend all of our astronomy on relics. I bet my mistletoe is really expensive right now. And so who provides for that? And then how does it provide? And then what does that transaction look like? And so when you compare it to something like a Guild Wars 2, which I know she's played, with a buy order and a sell order, and when you start to just have more movement, more turning and burning, more of the act of bringing things in and pressing things out. So we'll see.
Casual players are out collecting and grinding and gathering shit that for the hardcore players to use, but I'm thinking like in a raiding environment, if you're a hardcore raiding environment, you usually do have designated people on the team that are out there doing the crafting and gathering to gather and collect everything that's required for potions and food for the team. Usually there is somebody or multiple people on the team that are responsible for that and tend to be pretty hardcore about that. So I struggle to see the difference.
It has more to do with the consumption. It's closer to something like an EVE Online where things are being consumed. One of the hard things about Final Fantasy XIV is that nothing ever gets consumed. And what I mean by that is, imagine that you leveled a class to 15 or 30 back for cross-class skills, and then you equipped it with gear, and then you never used it again. And you had some food that was somehow relevant for that level, because some MMOs do stuff like that, and you needed it, and you stored that in your inventory. And so it was, chicken and rice or some crap like that. And you take a year off of that character. That gear does not diminish in any way. That food does not diminish in any way. You take that character out and die 20 million times. You walk to a single repair vendor, you repair it. It is full durability. It's done. It's done. It never is consumed ever. Because of the way the market board works, it does not allow for the price to ever kind of self-correct when somebody artificially lists low. So it causes some really weird things with how things are valued versus a more traditional commodity market, because it functions more like an eBay market where every listing is treated as unique. And so you have 27 listings of one materia, and they're all at different prices, but any one of them, they're all the same item ID. They're all identical in every way. And so if I want to buy 5, that's 5 separate transactions, and yet those people are all competing to try to be the one that gets bought first. And so it causes some weird stuff with the price. You can argue like, oh, well, that's really good for the buyer, except that then that buyer turns around and is a seller in some other way. So it causes a lot of weird stuff that just basically puts a constant downward pressure on the prices in the game. Not to mention it's a vertical progression game. So typically items over the course of many expansions become easier to acquire. Typically, broad speaking, items become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And New World is too new for us to know if that's going to be the case. We just literally don't know. And so that point of comparison doesn't quite add up, but to be aware of a weakness within Final Fantasy XIV system that does exist, that he may be hoping or believing that New World is showing it may not have, is that typically we have this long-term downward pressure. And I'm not saying these things are bad. Maybe this is their goal. Maybe they want constant downward pressure. Maybe they don't want a goblin economy. Maybe they don't want these things. And that's fine. But when you're saying they are different, they are different. A lot of what Brian argues when he and I collaborate and he talks about this player economy, a lot of what he wants for a player economy, I don't want in Final Fantasy XIV. He wants that to go as far as extreme things like why not be able to buy and sell ultimate weapons? I don't want that. So I'm not saying these things are bad, but they are intentional design choices within Final Fantasy XIV that cause it to not function the way a economy simulator commodity board would. And that's more of what the general market has moved to. That's what New World has moved to. That's what Guild Wars has moved to. That's what World of Warcraft has moved to. And some of those games, the word moved to isn't right. They launched with that, or they've always kind of been that way. But that is where everything is headed. So when he says that he wants the economy to work different in 14 really does act like a bit of an island compared to the other games that are more of what Brian describes.
Now, is a player-driven economy the perfect solution? No, that's always going to be something that struggles in the long term and the short term if the developers don't manage that. And so it is a resource intensive thing to do in terms of its design and its function.
What Brian is looking for is something that creates constant and incessant movement within Gil. He is looking for something that creates a need where every time you log in, you wish you had more money. In Guild Wars, I never, ever, ever feel too broke to play, but I always feel that if I had 10, 100, 1,000 more gold than I do, that would be better. And in Final Fantasy, I don't give a crap unless I set an artificial goal for myself. If I have 10 million gil more than I do right now, I literally just don't care. And so what he's looking for is a constant reason for money. And one of the things as I pick up New World and play it more than casually next year, and I move it into being an active MMO in my rotation with 14, then Guild Wars, then WoW, it will sit in the 4th spot. So it's not going to get an immense amount of playtime, but it'll sit in the 4th spot. Is I want to go chase gold and see what Brian is seeing. Is he feeling that he needs gold because he's limited on his playtime because of the other priorities he's named? And so it keeps it really hungry for him, and he's just got too much time in 14 to realize it's the same? Or is it truly different? Because at a glance, I think it's something closer to the World of Warcraft and Guild Wars systems. And that means that, like, I probably want gold. Now, what I will say is one of the reasons those two games have a constant need for gold, one of the reasons EVE Online has a constant need for gold, is because of things like the Plex token gem buying systems. Those cause an entirely new set of problems. And so, that, like, once again, I am not saying we should hope for these things in 14. They might say, hey, we have a set of problems in here linked to this decision, and if we change this decision, we're going to get this other set of problems, and we really don't want those. It might be intentional, but that doesn't mean they're not there.
FF14 literally has that. Crafters and gatherers are important when a raid tier drops. Yeah, that's
Every
what
8
I
months.
thought. That's why I don't understand where the comparison is. Yeah, twice you said I also don't.
An easy solution, but I
Understand
really
the
love that
difference.
New World has a player-driven economy because it makes your own quests. Like, we use garlic as an example. Garlic likes to fluctuate in price in New World. It's a valuable resource used in a lot of different things, and sometimes the price gets really high on garlic. What does that end up doing? It makes people go out and actually gather garlic.
In 14, the act of listing and managing prices on a retainer is clumsy. It is not fun to go farm up 15 materials and keep them listed on there. But in games with a cleaner market board UI, that can be fun. That can be easy. World of Warcraft's base UI is 1,000 times better than the market board, and then I can overlay add-ons on top of that. Guild Wars is 1,000 times better, and I can sell it from anywhere. And so then it takes the clumsy part and it gets that out of the way. And so then I can just make decisions to go farm. And when I go farm, I can farm a lot of anything, and everything has value. And there are things in 14 that will sit on a market board for sometimes months. I have found items that have been listed where in the history of the recent 20 transactions, I can see multiple years. Multiple years. That's crazy. Why put that item in the game if you're just going to let it die like that? And so, like, Final Fantasy is just not good at making Gil something that we can chase the same way we chase item level, where you use item level to kill harder things, to drop higher item level, and you go around and around and around, and there's some other systems kind of jump starting, and it feeds into a loop. Once again, I'm not saying that's a reason 14 should be worse than or different than New World, but I will agree that it is a reason that this Ginger Prime guy is pointing out that they are different.
Is had this experience where you look on the market board, something's really expensive. So you have to ask yourself, do I want to go gather this or not? Do I want to spend the time to go gather that, or do I want to buy it right now because I'm lazy? Because I want to know. Like, I really have an open mind, and I want to know because I'm interested. It's fascinating to me. Just like I'm fascinated by MMOs, and I'm interested in the differences between the major MMOs, and I want to understand those differences better. Really. I don't really like, I don't care if he doesn't like FF14 anymore. But I'm just neat. It's a neat topic to me.
Want to go gather garlic, and that's perfectly fine. But a lot of people find a lot of value. And being that you can use gold, and being that gold is a power in New World, it allows you to participate in any number of things. Gearing up and progression, for example.
And this is well above Penta. He is talking about, from a 14 standpoint, he believes that if people are getting extra Savage drops, you should be able to buy BIS. So if you believe that, you can see how there would be an immediate frustration with Final Fantasy XIV, right? And so the reasons that Ginger Prime believes that New World beats Final Fantasy, you can see that difference. And so saying New World lets me buy the equivalent of BIS and Final Fantasy doesn't let me buy BIS or Ultimate weapons. That is an objective difference. I fundamentally disagree that that is a good long-term system on its own, isolated from the rest of a game. I don't want games to have more of that. He does. So you can see how when I say this year, I'm looking for a very similar set of base ideas from video games as Brian, and I decided that I want more 14 in my life, and he decided he wants more New World in his life. You can see how we came to different solutions to the same problems when we have fundamental disagreements on which of these differences beats the other one.
And that ties into number 2, player choice, player builds, being able to really define your character. This is one of the things that is obviously missing from Final Fantasy XIV 1.0,
Yeah.
and we've seen it become more curated and streamlined due to balance.
That's
and
valid.
I understand why.
Yeah, I mean that is valid. But in New World, can you play like
Oh, she
every
has a house. Well, then she can't get another one.
class on one character? Because the thing with FF14, no, you don't have builds, no, you don't have talent trees, but your job will work right out the box. And if you don't like it, you can just play a completely different job with a different weapon.
Yeah, so the New World system. So this is their weapon system. Basically, each one is a little bit different, and you can equip them and you level them up. You level your progression kind of like you would a job inside Final Fantasy XIV. Each of these job stones has their own unique weapon, and so warriors have axes, dark knights have greatswords, gunbreakers have gunblades, and so on. And so in New World, instead of having defined classes, you just have weapons that you equip. And those weapons have small sub-tech trees. And so you get to make various choices. As you level things up, you have different options, and you have a couple of different trees, so they could add these different trees. These would be like having Summoner and Scholar underneath the same one. And you choose these various choices, and some of these are passives, some of these are actives. You have a very limited number of actives on your bar, so it feels kind of like Guild Wars, where at first glance you don't have enough buttons, but as you get better at the game, you slowly realize, oh god, there is still complexity underneath not enough buttons. I haven't played enough of it to be able to really put it to that, but like Guild Wars, for example, there's basically like 5 buttons on the left, 5 buttons on the right, a Final Fantasy equivalent of like a limit break type button, a personal limit break, and a dodge roll. And so you have about 12 buttons, give or take, outside of movement. And yet my rotation is like 28 buttons long. And so like the complexity is there. And so I'm looking forward to getting to know New World better over the next year. Hopefully Brian does a better job explaining this here in a second. But what she's saying here is like there is build variety in this. There absolutely is with how you pair these and how you do different builds. And then your armor, you choose different weights of armor, and that determines like how your dodge roll works. And there's like light, medium, and heavy, and so it gives you a little bit of so it's kind of like we had cross-class skills back. Like it's not the flex of something like Diablo or Path of Exiles or even Guild Wars, where like debatably in Guild Wars is so flexible in their builds, you can build bad builds.
So there are no classes in New World. The builds are very basic. Can I use a bow and then also use a staff? Like, what's the weapon?
Yeah, it's a weapon swap like Guild Wars. You have a primary and a secondary.
How are the weapons tied into the classes? There's only one race can play all classes by switching weapons.
Yep.
So you just put on a different weapon, and then you can I change the weapon in combat? You can play any weapon type 2 at a time. Okay. Okay.
I get it as a game designer, and I get it as a player why these choices were made, but it's really such a beautiful thing that in New World.
So there's no weapons themselves have abilities. It's true that FFXIV doesn't have build diversity in the same way that WoW does, really, with skill trees.
Doesn't have build diversity at all. If you go pull the rotations of the top 100 paladins, they are all geared the exact same way, and they are all doing the exact same abilities, to the point where people in these fights can tell you when they missed a singular global cooldown, because there is, and it's not, oh, I made a choice. No, It is literally perfect. There is zero. So just to make it clear, not to pad it, not to sugarcoat it, there is not, well, there's less. There's not less. If we had a spectrum of every game ever made, and Build Diversity over here was a card game, and you just literally did whatever you want, and there didn't even have to be a functional thing in a video game, and somehow that's in this category. That's all the way over here. And you said, what's a game with no build variety? Do we need to make something up, like a card game on that end? Because that sounds like that wouldn't exist. That's Final Fantasy XIV. There is literally no build variety. You are what you are. There is no, I just decided to use less spell cleaves during my inner release. Then you did it wrong.
That's a trade-off with the class system. I prefer the class system, being every class with one character. Well, we're not really comparing WoW right now. We're looking at FFXIV versus New Worlds. Though I agree with you, Stargazer. It looks like you can use any weapon. On New World.
Any weapon.
Okay.
You can step in, you can pick whatever weapons suit you, you can have your own crazy build, you can pick your stats, you can focus in on your perks. You, in a way, can define what is best in slot for you and best.
So,
No. I disagree with him there, because ultimately, the moment you get into something where you are deciding who can clear the deepest, hardest content, and if everybody can do it, who can do it the fastest or cleanest, or the moment you get into a PvP situation, there will be things that rise above anybody else always. And that will be established as the meta, because not everybody wants to be a sweaty gamer, but nobody wants to suck.
Goes online, I could make my own build, but it ended up being really scuffed at endgame.
Sure.
Because I created my own build just from whatever I wanted, and I liked it and it was working.
I've been told as a non-Paladin player that Paladin was a poor choice for the example I tried to make.
For me while I was leveling, but when I got to endgame, people wanted a cookie cutter build. Is it similar situation in New World, where people are at the end of the day going to start expecting a certain type of build from you? Because people were like, "Oh, what's that build you have?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm a tank mage. I'm a lightning atronach. That's my aesthetic." And they're like, "What the fuck is that?" If you're a mage, you should have a pet out. You should have your familiars out. You have your pets going, and you should have a staff. You have a destruction staff and play a mage. That's what we need. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that. And they're like, well, maybe your thing is good, but we don't have time to check it right now. Like, we're about to go into the dungeon, and it's completely reasonable. Like, it's reasonable that at endgame players would expect, like, have these expectations so that they don't have to sit around vetting your weird build to see if it's going to be good enough or not. Like, no one has time to do all that.
Yeah, she's absolutely head on right there. So one of the problems that I see with build variety that shows in New World versus Final Fantasy XIV, she kind of tried to keep her chat from comparing other games, so I'll try to stay out of other games. I'm eavesdropping on their conversation here. And so when I watched Ryan stream New World last time that he got into their kind of like crazy dungeons, they didn't get a clear. And that is because they didn't have the gear level, or they didn't have the build variety, or they didn't have the mechanical skill. They didn't, but I didn't find them blaming each other. I didn't find them getting angry. I didn't find them getting frustrated. And so there is something about either A, that's just unique to that community thing. Maybe there's people that like to fail together in Mythic Plus or something like that, if we're willing to bring other games into this. But I can just tell you, as we looked at systems like Criterion and all of that, the fact that there is no reward for dungeons, there's no real reward for like partial clears. There's a little bit of a loot drop, but ultimately, like, you want clears. You want clears of Savage. You want to eventually clear the tier of Savage. You want to clear all of Criterion. You want to clear whole runs of Variant. There's something about what they were doing that seemed fun for them. So I look forward to getting into the game to understand what that is, because she's absolutely right. If your goal is a clear, I don't even want to get started if we're going to spend 90 minutes failing because you chose a build that just can't do it.
There are still BIS abilities and builds that are just better at the game because, for instance, they are two-handed greatsword. So just play the optimized build. That's always the paradox, isn't it? With giving players the ability to choose their build and build their own BIS, like he just mentioned. That Build Your Own BIS kind of doesn't. That I don't know. What can you do that? Can you really and truly just pick whatever you think is going to be BIS? Because BIS to me is usually a set, like a very specific set that is the best for a weapon type.
A lot of people argue that choice is delusional, but that usually is coupled with modern MMOs in which matchmaking really has a massive impact and a massive cost to the social infrastructure, to essentially the choice of players, and to the content that they get match made into. All of these things are what we're sacrificing for matchmaking, and I'm really proud that New World hasn't adopted that, because if it ever does, outside of like PvP matchmaking, but in terms of a PvE content, the content's going to have to suffer, your player choice is going to have to suffer, and the community will suffer, all for the sake of this level of convenience. Now, they brought in tools like a Group Finder. Final Fantasy XIV's Party Finder is by far the pinnacle here. So Final Fantasy XIV takes it and cakes the Party Finder, and I hope that New World continues to draw inspiration from Final Fantasy XIV's Party Finder, and it sounds like they are. That seems like the feedback that they've gotten.
They don't have a Party Finder, but they want to add the Party Finder to the game. Does New World have buns? No, it doesn't.
I think that's going to ultimately help things out, especially with cross-server play coming to New World. First with OP.
Choice is delusional if you don't want to hamper the other people in the party, absolutely. I mean, I think there are degrees of it.
The third thing ties all of this together. The game is a very social game, and this is in part because of player building and because of the player-driven economy, but it's also in the core game isn't pure instance simulator. Now, Final Fantasy XIV has an open world, and you participate in that open world maybe a few times, and then maybe you go and do a beast tribe or a tribal quest in one of the zones. But in New World, it's all integrated.
We are all struggling to say tribal quest instead of beast tribe.
Open world dungeons, and you have the instance.
And I do think that this is another valid criticism of FF14, is the open world. The open world, I feel like there could be more to make it feel more alive outside of hunt trains, fates, and gathering. Those are the main open world activities to keep people outside and doing stuff. After playing Guild Wars 2, though, I feel like there's never going to be a game that lives up to what Guild Wars 2 offers.
Guild Wars 2 open world is best in class. I know people are excited about their mount system, but I don't think their mount system works for all games. It's too pervasive. It spreads into everything it touches. And so, like, to make the mount system that immersive, everything else has to accommodate it. But the open world, just the mentality of just the way they plan events and the way they use old zones and the way they quest, and Guild Wars, bar none, like, you could take Guild Wars mentality on open world and you could build the next 7.0. Still start with the story first, still plan on dungeons, trials, and raids, still plan on tribal quests. You could just take that mentality and, like, it is just bar none better. And you could do that to any other game. I do think if Guild Wars is that end of the spectrum, Final Fantasy is not the other end. There are things to do in that world, but the moment you're not capping tomes, the moment you're not doing hunts, the moment you don't care about gathering, especially things like unspoiled nodes, the moment you've already capped your tribal quests and you're done questing in the zone, it drops off. And so, like, I would say, like, it's not no open world. It's not no open world. But, you know, it's definitely closer to that end of the spectrum. Guild Wars is the North Star. If you want good open world content, nobody's doing it better than Guild Wars. I do think New World fits further up that slider. And since you have to choose a game based on how's the combat system work, how's the crafting system work, what's the community like, what's the progression like, does it have a subscription, how much hours does it take to get in, all these different things, you can't always say, well, I'm just going to pick the thing that's best in every category. So if you want more open world content, New World is a better selection over Final Fantasy XIV. If you're like, the only thing I give a crap about is open world content, keep going.
An open world, like, the open world is absolutely amazing in Guild Wars 2. It feels almost like the whole game is built around the open world as that being its heart and soul. Like, all the exploration, all the progression that I've been doing so far has just been about exploring and wandering around. All the mounts are there to, like, play into this immersive sense of, oh, well, now I'm underwater, or now I'm out here going, and I need this type of mount for this type of terrain. That's fucking cool. So that's something Guild Wars 2 does extremely well. And now I have that new perspective after playing Guild Wars. That, like, I feel like any other MMO or game that I play, the open world is going to seem like crap compared to
Expeditions.
Like,
I like that they have a balance between the two. And my personal fear and my feedback to the devs will always be, don't introduce a raid without introducing an open world raid. New World has an open world raid. In fact, you can do all these different things that...
Now, how is the open world in New World? You said New World's open world looks incredible, but without the content in it, that only gets you so far. So it looks really good, but what about like world bosses? Is there that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
New World open world is super boring because most of it is forest. But the non-forest areas are nice. Okay.
The zones feel huge.
You can't swim.
You cannot swim, just like in Final Fantasy you couldn't. They are talking about adding swimming. They're talking about adding, I think, boats. They're talking about adding mounts. You run faster on roads. So, like, they're trying to navigate how they want to add the ability to transport yourself a little bit better. Like in Realm Reborn, 1.0 did not have chocobo mounts, no jumping. And then we had chocobo mounts and jumping. And then we added flying. And then we added swimming. So, New World is they built a world that was fun to run through and be in. They had a teleport system that they experimented with a currency that was like Aetherites, but you had to pay this currency. But it was different than gold. It's called Azoth, but then they kind of neutered that out because they didn't like the way that felt. Kind of like Chocobo Porters, right? It just kind of just went away. And now there's this question of what the hell do I do with Azoth? So like New World is navigating transportation of its world. But when you are in its world, when you are in the place that you want to be in its world, it is beautiful and it feels awesome. And like Guild Wars, I find myself wanting to just explore it. And I'm like, I'm just going to hang out here for an hour. And it's like, what are you doing right now? What are you achieving? I don't know. But I like it.
No swimming. All the water is shallow. You just walk through it.
I don't think swimming really added that much to 14, by the way.
I don't want to make this whole video about how great Guild Wars 2 is. Like, I don't want to just go on and on about that. But underwater though. but you guys, look, underwater, they gave me a fucking spear gun and a trident and a spear and a pet shark. Okay? They gave me a spear gun and a pet shark when I go underwater, dude.
Then also bleeds into the core gameplay that happens in the open world. So my feedback is usually...
The spearfishing in 14, wonderful. Underwater in Guild Wars, it's the best of a terrible category.
Always directed at...
Now the bar has been raised to the point where I'm like, oh, swimming is not even the bar now. Like, swimming is that's like nothing. It's like the bare minimum. That's below the bare minimum. Like, not only do I now expect to be able to swim underwater in the open world, but I need to be able to have like a underwater mount, underwater pet, underwater abilities, underwater weapons.
An open world, that is a big aspect of Final Fantasy XI to me. And I hope that we can also draw inspiration from what made Final Fantasy XI great. I'd love to see Final Fantasy XI features brought into Final Fantasy XIV, but that's also one of those really big asks that really isn't practical unless they decided just to make a brand new MMORPG, and that's what I am hoping for.
How would you compare FF11's open world to FF14's open world? Like,
Dangerous.
What were the big draws for the FF11 open world for people here in the chat that have...
I've never played 11. I've watched a lot of 11. The number one thing that jumps out to me, the number one word for what Final Fantasy 11 is that is different than Final Fantasy 14 is dangerous. Now, it is dangerous to the point where a lot of people would go, yeah, and that's why I don't want to play it. New World is dangerous, but not to that point. When you're getting chased by a bear and you turn around and kill it, you're dying laughing. You're dying laughing. Oh my god, I almost got killed by a bear. Or maybe you did get killed by a bear. Why am I dying? And they won't even let me die to fall damage in Final Fantasy. You could take your trusts with you because you had to be able to have people with you because it was not designed to be done by solo. It was designed to benefit group content. And then my understanding is within the class system, basically you had like a subclass, but then when you went into like dungeons, so imagine if like Summoner could bring along some of the scholar abilities, but then when you went into a dungeon, you had to kind of like leave that behind, and you need to focus in. You're in a group, stick to your job, stay in your lane. But when you're out in the world, it's so dangerous. Like, let's just start letting you mix and match, is my understanding of the system.
I hated FF11 open world. After level 10, you have to be in the group or you're dead. 11 open world is pretty much Eureka. Yeah, that sounds about right. Need to be in a group or you're dead. Yeah, that was my experience. FF11 open world, a lot like Eureka. I mean, there is some charm to that. I did like in Eureka feeling like there were parts of the map that if I wander in there on accident, I'm going to be absolutely fucked. Like, I will be destroyed. I will be a little stain on the bottom of some giant elite's foot. The sense of danger was always present. I like the sense of danger. I do really like that, yeah. I was leveling in Silver Pine Forest, which is a low-level zone, but there are elites that wander around that will absolutely destroy you. Like, there's... Just for shits and giggles, the devs decided to put a couple of elites in there that if you don't know where they are at all times, they will find you, they will hunt you down.
It's the world, right? It's the world of Warcraft. There's a troll in the area who is eating all the little sheep you're farming up for your quests. You're picking on these little sheep, and he comes in, and way back in the day, you'd have your headphones on, and there'd be this boom, 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 boom. And you're like, oh, I need to go.
And they will kill you before you can run away.
It's awesome.
And like, yeah, I died to those a couple of times, but I enjoyed that actually. I think that's a nice thing to have in your game. Like, a lot of us remember from Burning Crusade.
And I cut across a field in New World, and it happened again. It is that same feeling. I stay on the road. The road is safe. The road ups your run speed, and the road doesn't have bears. And the road doesn't suddenly fill my entire screen with black smoke, and all of a sudden I'm fighting some nightmare. The world is safer. Stay on the road. Stay on the road.
Number 4, crafters are actually able to make best in slot. This plays into the player-driven economy, plays into the content that you can then partake in, and it plays into the gold is power. This aspect alone allows you, the player, to choose how you want to progress down the road. Do you want to dive into the hardest content, or do you want to focus in on trying to make the economy work? This really does feel like a key pillar and aspect of MMOs that has gone missing for some time, where you think of like social, you think of hard content, you think of, you know, like open world content, you think of crafting and gathering. I, for the longest time, never could really understand why anybody would invest so much time into crafting and gathering in Final Fantasy XIV. Yes, you can make money, but
people
money
like it.
has a limit. And
I mean, the reason they do that is because they enjoy the system. I really think that most people that are leveling the crafting and gathering actually like the process of doing it in FF14, maybe more than in any other game where there's crafting and gathering. Like, in a lot of other games, people really will just level it just because they heard it's a good way to make money. But if FF14, it's so involved, it's like its own job, its own armor sets, its own relics even.
Crafting in New World is its own jobs, much like Final Fantasy. And so you've got these craftings here. Let's check this out. Dun, 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 dun. And so we've got these crafters, and then we've got refiners, and so we've got these gatherers. And so you gather things so that you mine ore so that you can smelt the ore so that you can turn it into things. As you kind of level these up, you have the ability to use these to make various different portions of like your gear or consumables, things like that. The actual act of crafting tends to shift closer to that typical kind of auto-synth mentality that a lot of MMOs do. So it tends to be a little bit more about just getting into the system and getting used to it, that very discovery method. If we're going to keep bringing up Guild Wars 2, Guild Wars 2 is a wonderful experience getting to know the crafting, but once you get to know it, it's reasonably flat. And, you know, as opposed to something like World of Warcraft, where the act of getting the recipes is the only really interesting thing. They're looking to change that with Dragonflight. Best of luck. And so Final Fantasy is definitely the stronger crafting and gathering system, but I just wanted to kind of touch on what this is. It's very similar to Weapon Mastery, where you've got like a big overview system, and within those you have some minor little things that you need to learn, and how these interact with each other, and how much of this gets consumed, and how you manage inventory, and how the market board works and stuff is really what, in addition to a crafting and gathering system, because you learn how the system works, and then the question is now, why would I do it? And that's something that's not answered by the crafting and gathering system, but is instead answered by how the rest of the game chooses to address the things that crafters and gatherers provide.
Invested in that because they like the rotation that you build and figuring out what's going to be ideal for this craft. There are people that are super into that. That's their main reason for even playing the game.
Sure.
So it comes down to he wants to be able to get bis without having to raid to get it. Well, I also would like that. That sounds really good because I'm lazy.
I've been in games when they started just distributing free loot like that, and I didn't like the end result.
I'd like to have the bis just delivered to me by a Mog mail. One of the things I miss most is the elemental wheel and the importance of weather on the outdoor and even gear being...
It's why I don't personally see a reason to buy clears, because the act of the clear is the reward for me.
It's never going to be on par. But then all the different counter arguments aside only just end up frustrating me because it all, in my mind, defeats the purpose. It misses the point. Who cares what you're like? Who cares how you go about to getting to the end goal? When it comes down to number 4, crafters are actually able to make best in slot. This
he said that's I think I missed this because I asked the question and he said they can't.
Player-driven economy. This plays into the...
Okay, so nothing locked away based on your mechanical skill. It needs to be available from multiple sources. Mechanical skill can be a method, but it cannot be the exclusive method of receiving a reward.
Content that you can then partake in, and it plays into the gold is power.
But whenever they put in World of Warcraft, that ended up being really controversial because the people that were just using the WoW tokens with their real money to swipe and then go buy it from the auction house directly, the BIS item. So I feel like there's a good reason to make the best available gear from the most high effort content. I think that's the way that things should.
As a matter of fact, Dragonflight is stripping out some of the ways that BOEs were farmed in the past from Dragonflight. So like from Shadowlands, they are making a change for Dragonflight that will drastically change the way we, how many raid fights you're expected to do per week if you want to fill your vault, how many Mythic Plus per week you're going to do if you're Mythic Vault, how much PvP you're going to do if you just want to fill your Mythic Vault, how many World Quests you're going to do per week if you just want to cap that, and how many BOEs are coming out of raids. They are making a massive change to reduce what Brian is asking for. So World of Warcraft is getting further what he's asking for than closer.
Should be. It makes sense that the best gear should come from the most effort. That seems like a natural progression. I don't know how difficult this stuff is to craft, and I don't know how difficult it is to buy in New World, so it's possible that I'm comparing apples to oranges, but I don't know. Isn't all BIS in New World crafted? Is all the BIS crafted? There is gear with special attributes and procs.
Guild Wars has crafting BIS availability. It's not something you can do in a day. It's time gated. There is also, Guild Wars has lots of options. I don't know how New Worlds works. World of Warcraft BIS is not only not crafted, but is getting further and further from it. And Final Fantasy, it's definitely not, just objectively not. What he's calling for does happen a little bit in 14, but he wants to be able to source BIS entirely from crafted, and that's just not going to happen in 14. I think he just wants more sources of being able to hit the highest number, like people who clear the highest content do.
That are dungeon only in New World. New World crafting is not easy. Okay. So you're saying that crafting it is nightmare difficulty. The highest level of content should give you glamour, and the achievable highest level of content for the other 99% of players should be BIS.
Just to be clear, from Brian's perspective, the glamour that is locked behind this content is also something that should be available. There should not be unique glamours locked behind Ultimate. That is Brian's opinion. Just to be really clear how far he's taking this statement. It's not just, I think it'd be cool if crafters had some crazy method of getting bits, because that's something that Mr. Happy in his response to Sphia kind of talked about. What if crafters had a way to maybe across an expansion slowly upgrade it more than once? Maybe we explore that. No. All things need to be available from multiple sources at all times. Nothing should be truly locked or sealed away in anything. So if you are willing to PvP long enough, you can get things from PvP to trade your way and barter your paperclip into a house. Like, you should be able, all of that.
Hardest content, do you really need BIS? No, you don't. But it makes sense that a player on an RPG progression timeline wants to see the numbers on their gear go up. Like, they want to see the item level get the best it can be so they can feel a sense of like satisfaction and completion.
I think it's fair.
But money has a limit, and yes, there's catch-up gear, but
I
it's
needed to
never
hear
going to
it.
be on par. But then all the different counter arguments aside only just end up frustrating me, because it all, in my mind, defeats the purpose.
God, I think he'd like Guild Wars 2 if he was able to spend more time with it. I mean, he does like it, and he has spent time with it, but my God, everything he described sounds like Guild Wars 2 is just such a good freaking fit.
This is the point. Who cares what you're like? Who cares how you go about to getting to the end goal? But that, I think, is something that bleeds.
Everything you do in Guild Wars gives some form of experience, and yet it's all post-progression experience, which he calls for all the time. There's a million sources of gear, but gear doesn't really matter. There's build variety, and every class and build can kind of clear every content, but you don't have to. The story is there only when you want it. It's all fully voice acted, so all the things he's saying, New World has this, and it's getting these things, but Guild Wars already has those things. Some of those things you're calling for New World and saying one day maybe it'll have this. Guild Wars got in like 2012.
Be like another progression pathway, that makes sense. But also being able to just buy it off of the buy it straight from other players, I still don't really think that makes a lot of sense to me. If you don't even, well,
Takes
let me
into number 5.
just hear him out.
The balance between the instance and the open world content. I talked about this already throughout this entire thing, but to be able to run around this world that is breathtaking and it's engaging and
If I don't put the effort in, why expect the reward? Yeah.
it's dangerous, and at the same time, it also still allows you to have a solo level of play. Being able to see people out in the open world, never really feeling alone, even if you're feeling a little bit isolated or you're trying to escape from the busyness of the various different cities and city life within the game. And the instance content, I think, in this game is some of the best instance content. The expeditions are so powerful and so interesting, and they absolutely smash 14 in this regards, because 14 has the philosophy that the goal is to win, and everything's really structured around that victory. And in New World, it's not guaranteed. There's no guarantee that you will win and clear the expedition, but you're still actually rewarded completely along the way. So it never feels like you wasted your time, and it also doesn't necessarily.
Every single dungeon in Final Fantasy XIV is designed to die. So because he has not gotten to spend a lot of time in Extremes and Savages on patch, because he has not gotten to spend a lot of time in Ultimates, it's not about why he hasn't, the fact that he hasn't. There is very little content in Final Fantasy XIV that's not designed to die. And Yoshi P has even said he doesn't want to make Savage so hard that if somebody who's trying and putting the effort can't clear it. So the goal is never to lock something away. So if he feels that the New World devs are designing content and going, I don't know if you can beat this, and then saying, okay, but how are we going to put a reward structure in place so that a partial clear is also valuable, because clears are not a promise. I can understand what he's saying here.
Necessarily guarantee that you're gonna win,
but I don't know how New World works on that stuff.
First 20 levels in New World were enjoyable. I hit max and it was just the same for everything at the time.
That's actually one of the things Brian likes as well about New World, that the end game, in his opinion, starts from the very beginning. And not that you're doing the hardest things at the beginning, but that there is no, like, let me race to the good part. That as soon as you're in, if you like it at level 5, that's just going to continue. As opposed to sometimes in other MMOs, it feels like, wow, this is kind of dragging on. Don't worry, it gets better.
Expeditions are their dungeons. So he's saying that there's not a guarantee that you'll be able to clear the expedition. But if you don't, you're still going to get a reward for it. I feel like a little, I don't know, I feel a little bit torn about it. Because on the one hand, I'm like, maybe the dungeons in FF14 are too easy. too much of a snooze fest. But then again, I hear posts every single day from people complaining about what a hard time they had in the dungeon with the random people.
I've just never not gotten a clear. I have had a healer leave the dungeon, and as a warrior, I just finished Troya. When the DPS are like, don't pull the boss, the healer's not back. I'm not going in there with you. Okay. I'm still gonna pull the last boss of Troya, because I was here to get a clear, and I'm just gonna do that.
So, like, it seems people struggle an awful lot with the difficulty that the dungeons are at in Final Fantasy XIV right now. Even though I do not think that, like, I don't know how people are failing in them.
Yep.
Like, the expert doesn't really feel expert. I feel like that's valid. I do feel like that is valid. At least an expert roulette should feel maybe a little bit.
Expert?
A little bit more
expert
challenging than it is.
The most fun I've had in Troya is when we manual queued without a healer.
Sounds more and more like he wants Vanilla WoW. I don't know. Has he played Vanilla WoW?
It doesn't restrict us in that regards. It allows us the freedom to fail. And I think that's really a critical aspect to the success of New World. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm attracted to it as a gameplay design.
I don't know why he hasn't tried solo clears of Palace of the Dead or Heaven on High.
With the BIS argument, I know we're going back a little bit, but on the BIS thing, he said that it's good that the crafters can craft the BIS for people to buy. Is that what he's doing? Like, is that what he wants to do? Like, what would he want to do ideally for getting BIS? Like, does he want to...
He wants to pay a crafter, and maybe craft 1 or 2 pieces himself, but mostly pay a crafter. And he wants all the other things he does, a little bit of gathering. Yeah, I got some dungeon drops over here to be what pays for that. I played a hodgepodge of content because it's what I wanted to do. Every time I log in, I did everything I wanted, and at the end, I got the reward I wanted. And so BIS, swap BIS out for anything. There's a super cool new mount. There's a certain super cool glamour. The best in anything. And to those of you in chat that are saying, I play Guild Wars 2, you're like, I know. I already have that. It exists within Guild Wars 2. And there are things that are gated, but there's an awful lot of rewards that you can just take from over here, and you can just exchange for a pile of someone else's crap.
Raid for that? Does he want to craft? I think he doesn't want to craft for it. That's something that I think I missed here.
But we're only comparing 14 to New World, right? So it doesn't matter that Guild Wars, I think, is actually scoring really high on the scoreboard. I think Guild Wars is sitting there watching these two teams play, and they're just like, but we could beat both of these teams! He doesn't want the gates that are in Guild Wars, though. So to be honest, even in Guild Wars, he'd say, I love what you're doing. Can my sky scale be purchasable every single step? Can every single legendary be purchasable? Every single one? Can all versions of Ascended be purchasable? How do I buy a Warclaw? So there are things within Guild Wars I think he would still find gating. But it's close. It's close. It's close. And that full voice acted story and all those other things that he's been scoring New World off of, it's all there. It's all there. Guild Wars 2 is like EVE Online if you just landed on a planet and developed actual story. I'm loving it.
Like a relic. Because FF14, like, the closest thing that we would have to what I think he's describing would be the relic journey, where you need to grind out a shitload of materials for your relic weapon over the course of an expansion. Now,
and Shadowbringers was the most diverse relic weapon grind we ever did, and it was the first weapon relic that he ever finished. And he talked positively about it the entire way through.
We just have our first step right now in the game, so it's not all there yet. It will only be there at the end of the expansion. But at the end of the expansion, it will be Abyss weapon that you grinded for. So is this like that, but for every piece of armor that you can wear, not just the weapon in New World?
Final Fantasy XIV definitely with Crystalline Conflict wins that mode, and if they ever brought something.
I also would like to hear, what is attractive about BIS for him? That's another question that pops in my head. So if you don't want to craft it and you don't want to raid for it, which I'm not sure, if he
number go bigger. The same reason he likes leveling jobs. I have played games with Brian's for years. He likes filling bars. Make number go bigger. He does not like that the level caps and then it doesn't go anywhere. He wants there to be a system after you reach level cap. Like freaking Guild Wars.
Does just want to grind for it to get the BIS, then why? Like, what do you want to use it for?
I didn't realize that would be my response to this. I feel like her. Can we just make this whole video about Guild Wars?